WWE ID. Now, this was something that was brought out a few weeks ago. We haven't talked about it here on the show. And recently, apparently, it's been rumored that there has been a new signing into this WWE ID, and that is a one Zilla Fatu, potential future member of the Bloodline.
No shocker. No shocker there.
No shocker there if this is what, this program is created for. But I just want to kind of talk because obviously the last decade or so, essentially since the advent of NXT, whether it's Vince McMahon or it's Triple H or it's anyone in the WWE, whenever they're asked, whether it's on NBC or ESPN, where do wrestlers come from? They have always talked about football, gymnastics, all walks of life. Right? Celebrity like Logan Paul. But they stayed away from indie wrestling. And they have made a pretty clear point the last decade or so to essentially say that our focus here at WWE with the NIL Next in Line program that they have going on, right? And with NXT itself is that we are trying to develop our next line of talent right here in the WWE. We're hiring the Tiffany Strattons of the world outside of the college athletics realm, right? We're hiring another college athletic female that we talked about a few weeks ago on NXT, who's from the Baldwinsville, New York area, and I think a former track and field star. We're hiring
soccer star.
Yeah, soccer star, okay. But yeah, soccer star, gymnastics star, track and field star, even Braun Breaker, right? Even though he was the star in the sense of a second generation behind his dad, Rick Steiner, he just came out of the college football world, and wasn't really doing any indie wrestling before coming into NXT. But with all of that being said, and essentially WWE shooing the wrestling world, and we all talked about how for decades they shied away from calling it wrestling, right? Calling wrestlers instead of, which they like to call them sports entertainers or superstars. And then obviously, as I just mentioned, the NIL program that they created, which is called Next in Line, where they are signing college athletes and amateur athletes who are not wrestlers to essentially develop themselves into maybe someday after they're done being college athletes to be professional wrestlers.
I think it's smart. By the way, that is smart, by the way. You know why? Because, there's a small percentage of college athletes that make it to the professional level of their sport. It doesn't mean they're not a good athlete. It just means, they're not, they're just maybe a touch below like the, and just like an NFL term, like a Patrick Mahomes kind of player and stuff. So I personally, I like that part of it where it gives these really good athletes another alternative after their college days.
Yeah, I think Gabe Stevenson, who's not currently with WWE right now, but was like the big first signing of that, this not, professional wrestler.
Didn't work out.
Didn't work out so far, right? Maybe someday he'll come back, but that was like this big, like we are currently in development with this star. It just never essentially got to its final point.
Yeah.
But recently, WWE, as we preluded in this, talk, is WWE has created the ID program, WWE ID, where that is now working directly with independent wrestling. The wrestling companies out there where many people who aren't NBC or ESPN knew or thought wrestlers came from. Independent wrestling companies exist all over the country, and essentially WWE, I thought, did them a very big disservice when they were ever asked where talent comes from, and then essentially acted like they don't exist. You know what I mean? Acted like the Seth Rollins of the world or the Dean Ambrose of the world came from, this WWE NIL program, which they didn't. And now they're taking a step back, and not just taking a step back, but they're taking a big step back and then essentially a step forward with this. Now they're working directly with certain independent wrestling promotions where they're identifying certain wrestlers out there that they want to, pigeonhole to get them to WWE by following them directly And essentially, what was OVW back in the day, where OVW was independent wrestling, it was a developmental territory, right? And they were getting people on the fast track to becoming WWE superstars. But this way, they don't have OVW in that extent. They have NXT, which they're treating like a main brand. They're not really treating like they did OVW. Where OVW was treated, where Batista, John Cena, Brock Lesnar were off television, not mentioned, completely off TV. And then when they came to WWE, we didn't mention essentially that they came from OVW. They were like brand new to us. But with NXT, obviously, as a brand, they're shown to us there. And when they show up on Monday Night Raw, them being in NXT is common knowledge. But with OVW, like I said, they kind of treated that was indie wrestling, and it was development / indie. They don't have OVW anymore, so in order to save essential money too as well, they're, I don't want to say signing free agents. I don't know what you would put it, but they're scouting indie wrestlers.
They are
all over the country, and they're essentially putting their eyes on existing companies, which they should have just been doing all along. That's just how essentially this should have been doing. You know, you're scouting talent, right? But now they're doing it in a strategic way, where
there's a caveat. If
okay.
you and I'm going to name some of these, the list of these. Let's see. Reality of Wrestling. That's Booker T. Nightmare Factory. Cody Rhodes. Black and Brave. Seth Rollins. Just to name a few. To me, it's like they're working with certain groups. It's not like at least from my understanding. Maybe you can correct me on this if I'm wrong. Are they working with GCW directly? Like, is this like?
Well, I don't know about directly, but obviously, like Zilla Fatu, right? Zilla Fatu is somebody who is working all the promotions.
Here's the problem with it, though. I feel like almost in a way, this is like their way of going back and getting all these territories, like back in the day. Like that's like, to me, it's like they're gonna have this big ID and to like this WWE ID thing. This whole concept, to me, it's almost like you go back to the 80s where you have all the different territories and different regions. You have these regional promotions like a GCW, for example. I know you went to, I think it was XPW. There's all these different promotions out there, for example, that WWE could be like, well, we're gonna kind of stick it to you. I'm not saying they're doing that, but it wouldn't surprise me if they did these type of things in a way to kind of be, a monopoly with the independent circuit.
I don't think they're doing that. Because, again, the independent circuit in WWE are light years apart from each other. And essentially the independent circuit loves the WWE, and any sort of like back in the day, the territories were competitors. Today, I promise you, if a WWE talent or someone who ever touched a WWE ring shows up in indie wrestling, that's part of their promotion.
So wait,
Come see Heroes of Wrestling featuring former WWE superstar.
Well, you don't think in the back of your mind that WWE isn't trying to do something behind the scenes where it's like they're trying to, in a way, kill the independent like wrestling scene?
No, I don't think they're doing. Here's what I think, okay. Right? Because I think, like, for example, like a GCW, which is a big promotion. Right? They're not indie in that sense. They're a touring promotion. I think they just came off a show on Saturday in Hawaii, and I want to say no other major promotion that I can think of that's not like essentially based out of Hawaii. I've been to Hawaii this year, counting WWE, AEW, TNA. None of them, I don't think, have held shows in Hawaii this year, and they just did. But what I'm saying is, I think they're doing them a service because essentially it's like AAA baseball, right? When people go to local baseball or local hockey or local basketball, and there's a big star down on rehab, or somebody in whom a big Yankees, Mets, Red Sox have their eye on and everyone kind of knows about, it actually helps them because they love it. They're like, bring the attention to us. I want to advertise that you have a big WWE prospect on our roster, because it's the same as essentially advertising that you have a former WWE wrestler, right? When we advertise and we have this collage of wrestlers on our poster advertising our upcoming event, they always put the people have heard of right in front. So whether that is a current WWE wrestler, whether that's a Booker T who runs the promotion, right, or it's a prospect that no one's ever heard of, but you can put right underneath it WWE prospect, right? So they're loving that.
I hope you're right. I really do hope you're right.
Do I think it's hurting someone, and do I think it's out there to kind of put the kibosh on other businesses? Yes, I do. And here's who I think it is: AEW, TNA, real competitors. Because what you're doing is you're taking these free agents out there, right? And you're essentially sewing them up. So you have your WWE roster, you have your NXT roster, you have your NIL guys who are not pro wrestlers, but that you're going to train to be pro wrestlers somewhere down the line if they want to be. And now you're going out there because AEW doesn't have NIL, right? AEW doesn't have NXT. They have Ring of Honor, but that's a different thing, right? They don't have a developmental territory. Where does AEW get their talent? They get their talent from other companies. And what you're doing is you're going into those companies and you're signing those guys for a little bit of money or maybe even no money, but you're just essentially getting them under contract so that they can't go to AEW. You're getting Zilla Fatu. You're saying, hey, Zilla, we don't got room for you on Raw. We don't have room for you on SmackDown. We don't have room for you on NXT, and we don't want to pay you any money, but we want you to be exclusive to us. So go out there, keep wrestling with GCW and IEW and TW and whatever independent companies exist out there, House of Glory, et cetera, but essentially you can't talk to AEW. You can't talk to TNA.
You know what, though?
You're exclusive
I will say, though,
you can't talk to New Japan.
I wouldn't be surprised in that, and especially with like the Zilla Fatu portion of it. It wouldn't surprise me if they have him like sign like a signing bonus of some sort. Like maybe they're like, hey, you'll be under our umbrella. Here's a check for say $50,000 or whatever the case may be. I get what you're saying. That doesn't sound too far fetched. I am skeptical of the real nature behind what WWE is doing. I just and what you mentioned with TNA and AEW, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just curious to see in the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years. Let's see what happens and see who it's helping, who it's hurting, because I'm very curious to see how all these dominoes are going to fall.
I think though it's very interesting. It can be related to like sports when it comes to like exclusivity and stuff like that. What I think WWE is doing here, right, is they don't want to sign indie wrestlers that they haven't been watching for a long time. But they also don't want maybe AEW or New Japan or any of those major companies to sign them, right? So what they do is they essentially put this tag on them, which is I don't know if you've seen like the tweets and all the other stuff, is they put these like eyeball tweets out there and then put a wrestler essentially like we got our eye on them, right? Yeah. So they put these eyeballs on them and they put this kind of handcuffs on them to essentially say, we're going to start watching you. And while we're watching you, you're essentially property of us while we are scouting you. And then once we've made the decision, we're either going to bring you in or we're going to send you back out into the wild. But while we're watching you, we're kind of taking you off the market. So if AEW, now Zilla Fatu, we know, right? He's WWE. He's got the bloodline. That's the future for him. Yeah. There's no real worry about AEW swallowing him up or anything like that. Exactly. WWE's got to have him under lock and key. Right, it's sooner rather than later that he's going to be right up there based on his involvement in the bloodline. But some of these other guys, right, that AEW might have their eye on, right, essentially you're putting your eyes on them, and essentially what you're saying is scouts in baseball, right? You have 50 scouts at a baseball game for all different teams, and they all are watching players. Here's what by doing this is essentially saying, we're the scout for this guy. We're going to watch him. And if we don't want him, we'll let him go. But while we're watching him, you can't watch him. You know what I mean? Or you can't, if we like what we're seeing, we're first in line to get a shot at signing him.
When you put
you
it that
can't sign
way,
him until we've denied him.
When you put it that way, that does make a lot of sense. Putting it that way, I feel like WWE, that would be something they would probably do or at least consider, because I think you're right. I think you're onto something there where it could be more AEW and TNA. I just, I hope for the sake of wrestling fans and whatnot, there's so many independent promotions out there. I just hope this whole thing doesn't blow up in their face like that, because that's the pipeline. I know you get the NIL, you get, you name it, all these former athletes, but you're still going to have wrestlers going through the independent system that eventually will be in WWE. So we just can't have the independent system going down the drain. So I hope it doesn't affect that in a negative way.
No, I think it'll actually be beneficial for the independent system, because again, it'll give some notoriety to them. It's don't need to harken on the baseball thing, right? But we learned with minor league baseball, it's what helps these minor league baseball teams very much so is being affiliated with the majors, right? That's what they sell. We're the parents for the Boston Red Sox, we're the babies for the Boston Red Sox. Our parent club's the Yankees, the Dodgers, et cetera, right? and having that as like, and that's why a lot of these very low level single A teams name their teams after the parent club, because we want you to know when you're coming to this tiny little town that you're like, oh, this is just a bunch of ragtag kids who work at McDonald's during the day playing baseball for fun. But by having this affiliation, you know that the Dodgers, somebody who sniffed Dodgers Stadium in the front office has been here before and has their eye on these guys. So just that kind of rub and that kind of affiliation is like what they're selling. I've been to some very small towns, which I can promise you, no one who's ever been to Los Angeles has ever also been to these towns, but yet they have this tiny little affiliation with the LA Dodgers, and they're going to milk it for all they're worth, because that gets people to come out to this little rinky-dink town to watch baseball, knowing that these people could someday have a cup of coffee with the Dodgers, from here. And that would be such a huge tie, right? To have that kind of affiliation with that. So essentially that's what these independent companies are doing, is like saying, hey, that our wrestlers, while granted they might never make it to WWE, by having that kind of rub and that knowing that they can advertise that WWE has their eye on some people that are in our talent pool, is going to get some local people to come out, and they're going to tell their kids when they're bringing a wrestler, like, hey, that guy could be in WWE, with an actual realistic, to it, because of the fact that they say, hey, WWE is actually have their stamp of approval on that guy right there. So he's not in WWE yet. Normally independent wrestlers sell the former, like formerly in WWE, Spike Dudley, formerly in WWE, Bubba Ray Dudley, that kind of stuff. But this case, they can kind of sell the future, like future WWE prospect, right? And that way you can see a guy who, again, can say, hey, I've been to Stamford, Connecticut. I've met with Triple H. I'm not under WWE contract currently, but I'm essentially a WWE prospect, right? So you can start advertising, featuring WWE prospect. That's what they'll advertise, right? And they'll put that on their marquee. Similar to, like I said, similar with baseball. When baseball goes independent and they're not affiliated with a team anymore, it's tough to sell, because those guys could make the majors, but there's no real knowledge that that they're actually talking with the majors or have that connection. But when you're like, no, that guy actually, his checks come from the New York Yankees, that kind of gives that realistic, that's why they call their teams the Yankees and the Mets and the Red Sox, is so that people know, hey, they actually have that. Like, you'll see a WWE logo at an independent wrestling company. That independent wrestling company is like, we have permission to have, we are connected, so we're allowed. It's recently in independent or minor league baseball, when they dropped a bunch of the teams, they have these now parent and affiliation leagues, which are teams that aren't affiliated with specific teams, but there are a bunch of indie baseball leagues out there that have the blessing of Major League Baseball. Meaning essentially Major League Baseball could also be watching players from these leagues, and they advertise it. There's a big banner outside of those Long Island Ducks games that say, this is an official Major League affiliated team, even though they're not affiliated with a team directly, but Major League Baseball says, they have our blessing.
It's under the umbrella, essentially.
Under the big umbrella, right? Yeah. So I think that's, again, big for WWE. But my question, I kind of finalize this out with the WWE ID, is we talked about, obviously, the fact that 10 years ago, they wanted nothing to do essentially publicly with independent wrestling, saying that we develop our guys. It's our system. We're not here to, we're not bringing, these guys are not stars outside of WWE. We develop all of our own people. All of our people are nothing without the WWE. Does this say something about WWE's NXT and developmental brand, that maybe it's not getting to the level that they want it to be, that they're starting to look elsewhere publicly? Or is it just that they want to have their finger on everything?
I think it's the latter. I think they want to have their finger on everything. Because I'll be honest with you, I think NXT is in a really good place right now. I think they have some really good. They're building some really good stars in various divisions, whether it's singles, tag, men's, women's. I'll be honest with you. I think outside of the black and gold NXT era where it was a lot of the indie darlings. This is probably the best that's been since, the peak of that point. It's gotten really good, and I do like the crossover with TNA. So I think NXT's in a good place. But, to answer that question, I would say it's the latter, because WWE just wants their fingerprints on everything.